He can.
I'll spend some time with a dialect coach. Don't worry about that. Dumbledore couldn't possibly be anything other than English. I just have to do my best.
And we remember rocker Rick by a generous contribution from the Fiducia Fund, proud to support this station's arts and culture programming. Welcome to the Culture Show. I'm Jared Bowen, live from the Boston Public Library.
I'm Callie Crossley.
I'm Edgar B. Herwick III.
We're going over 1 week off, and I forget how to open this show. We're going over the week's top arts and culture headlines, starting with a brand new museum in Boston. Yesterday was the groundbreaking ceremony for the Holocaust Museum Boston. The significance of the institution is as much about not forgetting the past as it is about confronting and challenging the anti-Semitism and bigotry pervasive today. So this is quite a significant moment because this institution has been years in the making. If people are wondering where it is or they want to see it take shape, which I think will be very interesting to see because the design is very architecturally relevant. It's right across from Park Street Station on Tremont Street. This is the first new museum that I'm aware of in quite some time to be built in the city. And when I say it's architecturally relevant, it's because its exterior will look like curtains that have been drawn, and that is significant because it represents Jewish families who drew the curtains as the Nazi regime was taking hold. There is one peel back, and that is where a rail car from the Holocaust will be on view. So that's our first sense of how visceral and how experiential this museum will be as it reminds us of this history.
I'm wondering if they're going to, include the content in the same kind of way that the National Holocaust Museum does in D.C. I assume both of you have been there, but it's pretty powerful. I was trying to find a bigger word than powerful, but it's one of the most beautifully designed museums in terms of telling the story. And part of what makes it so beautiful are those real stories from everybody that the museum struggles to get all the time still, because believe it or not, a lot of those folks that lived through that time don't want to talk about it. And so they've spent an enormous amount of energy trying to get that kind of history documented from people who lived through it. And I would assume that's what's going to happen here. We'll just get folks from around here telling their stories, I hope. And I hope now, given the tenor of the times we're in right now, where the anti-Semitism is front page, and rightly so, appropriately so, that will maybe encourage others to offer those artifacts and those particular stories to the museum. But I imagine it's going to be quite powerful.
Yeah. You've got to imagine it will be, and it's it should be noted it's essentially right along the Freedom Trail, which I think for the organizers of this, it wasn't necessarily like they wanted to put it there, but when that opportunity came, when the space became available and it was on the Freedom Trail, I think that's something that has significance for them. And you were talking, Jared, about the rail car, which is going to be visible, from the street. I think they've noted that from the street, you will be able to see, once this is open, you'll be able to see people get onto that car, but you won't be able to see them get off of that car. And
That's
that
right.
is meant to also be symbolic. So clearly a lot of thought being put into this, as you would expect. And I think you're right, Callie. I think it's just going to be an incredibly powerful space here in the city.
Well, speaking of the founders and the intention behind this, Jody Kippens is co-founder of the Holocaust Legacy Foundation, which is leading the effort to build a museum. Here she is talking to NBC Boston last year about why she's behind this effort.
The Holocaust, even though it seems like it was so long ago and so far away, it really wasn't. I avoided the Holocaust. It was scary for me. The reason we're doing this museum is because the education piece is important. I didn't have that education.
And I think that's very significant because as I was thinking about this, there were two moments I feel like, within the last year that brought me even further into understanding the impact of the Holocaust. One was the film, The Zone of Interest. We always talk about how the arts take us beyond headlines and maybe documentation, which gives a different perspective because there's a narrative there, including also in Auschwitz not long ago, not far away, the exhibition which was recently in town, which presented a number of artifacts that were from the Auschwitz museum and remembrance site in Germany and in Poland and collected from the Holocaust moment. And so, of course, that will be front and center in this museum, and it's unavoidable to understand this history when you come face to face with shoes, with, in the case of this exhibition from Auschwitz, from the gas chambers. There's no denying, and we know there are Holocaust deniers today, there's no denying that history and the impact.
The other thing is, this will be the only one in New England. I was, I don't know why I thought there might be others, but, that's a pretty powerful moment as well. And you're talking about the train cars, Edgar, in the National Museum. When you get into the elevator, it is the train.
Yeah.
So the folks that take you up say, at this moment, just be silent, because there are people that will never come back. You'll find out what happens to them afterwards. As you come in, you get a name of a person. You find out at the very end. But those train cars, when you see them, that makes the point.
Well, and and I think it is, you talk about the tenor of the times that we're in. I think we've all been reminded in recent years that we need to continue to tell these stories, things that have happened in our past that maybe, you sort of feel like, okay, that story has been told, people now know better.
No.
That's not how people work, and we need to continue to have spaces where we tell the stories of these things that happened, because we have to keep telling it.
Because past is prologue.
Yes,
that's correct.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, another story where the past and present converge. Harvard University will relinquish ownership of historic images of enslaved people. That follows a legal fight with Tamara Lanier, who says she is a descendant of one of the individuals featured in 175-year-old daguerreotypes, which have been in the Harvard University collection for a long time. This is such a disgusting story, essentially. It's a sociologist who at one point was trying, through his research, through this photography, was trying to prove that people who were not white were intellectually inferior to white people, and this was part of his documentation. So when these daguerreotypes, which were early photography, what we saw before photography, were discovered in 1976, they have been used in various capacities for learning and teaching at Harvard. But then we had a community that stepped forward and said that there should be not ownership by Harvard of these images, because these were people who were essentially used as specimens here.
And also that Louis Agassiz, that was the name of the Harvard biologist, had a particular point in mind by commissioning these photographs. He didn't just find some and then build his case. He commissioned them because his point was to tell everybody else that black people were inferior. These are really graphic photos of folks, and the Tamara Lanier has been in a years-long fight to try to get these back, because she says these are her ancestors. I'm not sure Harvard agrees about that. And what made this so interesting, this case and now this victory, is that two court rulings said, yes, the photographer can own the rights to those photographs, which would seem to be the end of it. But they, in both cases, gave her permission to keep pursuing the right to get these back as connection to her, and
essentially emotional distress was what she was kind of suing for, right? In the end, I mean, I'm glad to see that there is some resolution coming to this, because I think this is one of those, when you look into this is one of those times where, as frustrating as it is, I think we all know what the morally right thing to happen here is, right? But this fight happens because the way our laws are written, for better or worse, even though they're attempting to have a framework for justice, there are gaps in that. And sometimes, like, what is legally correct and what is morally correct are seemingly somewhat at odds. To your point with this, Callie, it's sort of like, the law looks at this and they say over and over again, well, he took the photographs, they own the photographs, that's how ownership of photographs works, right? And we can look at this and say that's morally wrong. So, I think it's a huge deal. I think that, in a legal way of looking at it, people have pointed out this is a very big deal that the SJC said, yes, okay, that's how the law works. However, in this case, you can continue to pursue this over this situation of emotional distress. And so I'm glad that there was an agreement, at least for now, reached here, because I think that's clearly the right thing to happen.
Well, and the moral road that Harvard University seems to have achieved will deposit these daguerreotypes at the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. So they will go to another institution.
And that's where they were. I mean, the people who were photographed here were from South Carolina. So that, I think that is an important piece of it there.
And so Harvard has identified that there is a better place for them to live, that where it's better, where that story is better told. Here is Tamara Lanier, again, the woman who says she is a descendant of one of the people who was photographed 175 years ago, speaking at a press conference as these were turned over, the announcement of them being turned over to this institution in South Carolina this week.
This is a moment in history when the sons and daughters of stolen ancestors can stand with pride and rightfully proclaim a victory for reparations. This pilfered property, images taken without dignity or consent, and used to promote a racist pseudoscience, will now be repatriated to a home where their stories can be told and their humanity can be restored.
And I think when we're talking about 175-year-old history, it is that. It's history. This needs to be public. It needs to be publicly accessible where that best can happen. And it looks like that has happened in this case.
I think also, just to note that those pictures got around a lot. I've seen those pictures many, many times.
They're in books.
They're everywhere. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the great-great-granddaughter of Louis Agassiz was a part of this to say that what he did was incorrect.
Yeah.
That was wrong.
I think
that's really important
and
to
coming
note.
together with Tamara, which is quite astonishing.
Exactly.
In some ways, I think that's one of the most important things about this, right? I think we were even just talking about this last week, that idea of like, it sounds simple, but sometimes you just got to come out and you say, hey, this thing that happened, it was wrong. And I'm sorry that it happened, and we shouldn't do it anymore. And so I think, there's that idea of, you could see where somebody would look at their family history and be like, oh, that's tricky. My ancestor was involved in this terrible thing. But I think it's very important when somebody kind of comes out and says, like, and it was wrong. Yeah. And we're sorry for that. And I'm sorry for that. And I don't want to be a part of it. It was wrong. Let's move forward. I think that's a very powerful and important piece of this.
I do too.
Well, speaking of correcting course, we think, as part of the Trump administration's attempts to purge government institutions of all things they see as woke, in April, the Pentagon ordered the Naval Academy to remove any books from its library that promoted a DEI agenda, removing close to 400 books. Now, as of this week, most of them have been returned to their rightful bookshelves, which I think surprised a lot of people.
It surprised me. We should say that what they mean by DEI is not what DEI really is, because they're using it inappropriately. This is not what it means. Really what they mean is anything that looks like it says race in it or black in it, that's what we're removing from the shelves, or queer. And they had no criteria for this.
Yep.
So only 20 of them have been held back, but 381 books had been pulled. And so most of them are now back on the shelves, thank God. I mean, I have been distressed about just the wide, the breadth and depth of their ripping stuff from various institutions, because and it makes no sense. Of course, none of this makes any sense. But when they moved the Harriet Tubman book from and said that was DEI, and from an exhibit about. I don't get it, but the Underground Railroad, how do you tell the Underground Railroad she's a general on the Underground? Anyway, this is good news.
It is, but I think there's a couple things here, right? Number one, I feel like at the core of this, we need to remember that there seems to be a real misunderstanding of what a library is for.
Yes.
The idea that somehow, even if you disagree with this particular point of view, like, in my mind, in theory, if you feel like your ideas are correct and can stand up to investigation and a closer look, you should have no problem with other ideas being out there in somewhere like, say, a library. Like, it's not a library. The job of the library is not to just have stuff that is your point of view. That's a misunderstanding of what a library is. I think the other thing here, while I applaud the fact that most of these books have gone back on the shelves, I think we also should still be a little bit disturbed that these 20 books are still being investigated because they include things like the term transsexual in them. I still think I have a problem with that. You got to, I think about the way a negotiation often works, and you think about people who go into a negotiation. You go in and you ask for the moon, so that when you just ask for a little slice of the pie, it seems like, oh, well, I'll just give up this little slice of the pie. But you shouldn't have given up the little slice of the pie either. So I think this is a good thing, but I think we should still be troubled to a certain extent by what's going on.
Well, to that point, Edgar, our control room is giving me some breaking news right now, which is that President Trump has fired the director of the National Portrait Gallery. He made the announcement in a post on his social media site, Truth Social. Again, this is just breaking. I believe this is a quote from the president. Our control room can confirm that that's the case that I'm reading, but it says, the president said, upon this termination, upon the request and recommendation of many people, I am hereby terminating the employment of Kim Sajid as director of the National Portrait Gallery. She is a highly partisan person. Again, I'm reading the words of the president, and a strong supporter of DEI, which is totally inappropriate in her position. Her replacement will be named shortly. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And this is directly from the president on his Truth Social site earlier today. So just at the moment when we see all but about 20 of these books returned, we know that this is not a change in policy from the federal government when it's eliminating the director of the National Portrait Gallery for apparently being endorsing DEI initiatives within the museum.
And was that on the recommendation of, quote, many people?
Right.
Who are those people?
And this is not DEI. I just want to say that again. That's just, let me say that again. That's not DEI. That's something else. But
well, we will always continue to cover all of these stories as they relate to the targeting of arts and culture from the federal government with these policies. And I should mention that she was the first woman to lead the gallery since its founding in 1962 and had held the role since 2013. Well, coming up, overnight lines, mail flights, and instant sellouts. We'll break down the Labubu frenzy. That's next on The Culture Show. Stay with us.
The Culture Show is made possible in part by a generous contribution from the Fiducia Fund, proud to support this station's art and culture programming.
RFK Jr. threatens the system of peer-reviewed medical journals.
We're probably going to stop publishing in the Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, and those other journals because they're all corrupt.
I'm Arun Roth. Today on GBH's All Things Considered, the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine will join us to talk about the potential damage to medical research. It's all starting at 4 on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you. And Boston Ballet, presenting Romeo et Juliet, a fresh take on Shakespeare's timeless tale with breathtaking choreography and live music by the Boston Ballet Orchestra. On stage now through June 8th. Official tickets at bostonballet.org. And Cambridge Savings Bank, where they are committed to your financial well-being, and community is at the core of everything they do. Cambridge Savings Bank, always you. More at cambridgesavings.com, member FDIC. And Newport Mansions, presenting Richard Morris Hunt in a New Light, a groundbreaking exhibition examining the architect's impact on American culture and his vision for a gilded American civilization. Opening May 30th at Rosecliff.
Hi, I'm Gal Ziperman-Lotan, bringing you GBH Daily, a newsletter to help you stay informed, not overwhelmed. You can subscribe today and get it in your inbox at gbh.org/daily. That's gbh.org/daily.
Welcome back to The Culture Show. I'm Jared Bowen, live from our GBH studio at the Boston Public Library. I'm joined by co-hosts Callie Crossley and Edgar B. Herwick III. If you're just tuning in, it's our Arts and Culture Week in Review, which includes Labubu Mania. There are Labubus on streets around the world. There are fights for Labubus. Celebrities are giving Labubus tender, loving care. And if you don't have a Labubu, well, boo-hoo for you. Callie, what's a Labubu?
It's this creature that was first featured as a character in the Monsters storybook. We can see a picture of it. They look really weird to me. They got funny little faces. It's a plush toy. So, I mean, I guess they're, ugly to be adored, that kind of thing. And you can get them, obviously, full size, but you can also get them. They're clipped onto bags and briefcases and whatever. That's how That's how popular they have become. So this is all the rage. Simone Biles just bought 2 when she was in Hong Kong. Part of the
Did she text you that?
No, I just know. She just mentioned it. She got 2 while she was in Hong Kong. She thought she should buy them there and as opposed to here. Part of the appeal, or what's driven the appeal, is that they come blind boxed. So you don't know which character or you'll get from the series. So you open up and you see. So some are more popular than others, and that's what's driving the price up.
So they're exclusively sold by Pop Mart, which is a Chinese outlet, Chinese-based, but there are 22 staffed Pop Marts in the United States, although none in Massachusetts, that, as I understand. I guess the closest one is Connecticut. And then they also have robo shops, which are essentially vending machines where you can go and you get this stuff. But their whole thing is this blind box strategy, which is
like baseball cards.
It's exactly like baseball cards, like the sort of limited edition baseball. You don't know what you're going to get. And they have done gangbusters business, not just with the Labubus, but all these other kinds of toys. I mean, this is fascinating to me.
Me too.
Well, it's this whole thing where they call it Birkinifying your handbag. So we know the Birkin handbag. We talked about this on the show.
Yes,
the very famous Hermes bag that nobody can seem to get unless you spend oodles and oodles of money at Hermes. But Jane Birkin herself apparently would adorn her bag with everything from nail clippers to little tchotchkes to little stuffed animals. And so this trend is catching on again. As we keep talking about on this show, everything old is new again.
That's correct.
So now we see all these celebrities do it, although I don't think it was wise for Simone Biles to go to Hong Kong to do this, because that's where some fights have broken out. I mean, this is where this gets wild.
But that also, I mean, you look
That's
back,
part of it.
that is like the toy craze thing, right? Go back to the Cabbage Patch Kids and Beanie Babies and all of the, this idea that like it's a craze. This is like when people collectively sort of lose their mind, which we occasionally do over things like strange, creepy looking toys. And let's go.
There's 300 styles of them since 2019.
300.
So you're blind boxing. You don't know what you'll get.
I keep looking out into the crowd here at the library to see if anybody has a Labubu. I don't see any Labubus out here. We are a Labubu-less library.
Did anybody know what a Labubu was before we started talking about this today? Oh, we have one person, at least one person that I can see, 2 people who know what a Labubu is. Well, it's also part of this thing called kidult, where by 2034, according to one estimate, kidults, people buying toys and whatnot. I do have a sock monkey at home, so maybe I'm a kidult. Those sales will account for 1/3 of all EU sales will be made by adults as this goes forward. But we know, Edgar, to your point about the Cabbage Patch Kids, it doesn't actually last for long.
And I think the thing is remember what happened with the Beanie Babies. Like, sell high. Don't hold on to those for too long, right? Because there was a time where like you could buy a house by selling a couple of your Beanie Babies off. Now you can get them, for
now there are whole Beanie Baby islands in the Pacific Ocean.
Also, I like the idea that we're going to get to the point where so many adults are buying kid toys that kids are like, what's not cool? Toys, because like my parents collect toys. That's like toys are for grown-ups. That is so lame.
That's part of the problem with the Barbie dolls. If you want a really specialty Barbie doll, you cannot, poor kid, because I'll knock you over for a few of them. I still want that Ava DuVernay one.
Wait, did you just say you would knock a kid over
That
for?
That is correct. You heard me. Yes, for an Ava DuVernay. Yes,
well,
I
now
would.
see, this is where I think the blind box thing. I think Barbie dolls in the blind box thing would work. Would you buy a bunch of them just for the chance of that Barbie doll?
No, because that's just too many chances. I want Ava DuVernay with her director's chair. If anybody's listening.
Okay. If you're looking for
that was a very deliberate plant. Because
I'm just saying.
I think there's somebody specific is listening.
No, I do not.
Well, we're hearing the music of Harry Potter right now because there's good news for all you Potterheads. The Harry Potter franchise is riding its broom to HBO Max. The cast has been announced, and it includes American John Lithgow as Dumbledore, but it's also raising questions about why J.K. Rowling, for her stance on trans issues, is enjoying more Potter play. So yeah, if people haven't followed this, yes, of course, we had the books, and then, of course, we had the films, and then we had all of the ancillary films, which told the story. Apparently that wasn't enough because a few generations later, here we are with a whole series where we know most of the casting at this point, although not all Lord Voldemort.
Yeah.
And this will play out over the course of a decade, basically, with the whole story being faithfully told as they describe it, with one book playing out over 1 year, but obviously they'll stretch it just a little bit. So there are a couple of issues that have arisen. First, I guess we'll go from lightest to darkest. And poor John Lithgow, who we've already seen play a Brit, who played Winston Churchill in The Crown.
And that's a pretty big deal Brit, right?
Yes,
like, you know what I mean? It's not just like some character. It's Winston Churchill, the avatar of Britain.
Yeah, but Dumbledore is a whole different thing.
Well, he was so John Lithgow is really good, but obviously he's an immensely talented actor, and he's saying, yes, I can do this. In fact, we may even have some sound from this, and this is John Lithgow talking about he can well handle this role. Thank you very much.
I'm proud to be playing the same part that Richard Harris and Michael Gambon played, and I think I'll bring something new to it. As far as the controversy involved, I don't know what to think. Yes, it has enraged some people that I'm even playing the part. I saw an open letter to John Lithgow insisting that I walk away from Harry Potter. I'm not going to do that.
That's right. Stand your ground.
There it is.
Right.
How can you walk away from Harry Potter?
Well, you
and
know,
the money that probably is coming.
Oh, absolutely. This is a little bit of what we were talking about with regard to James Bond, and now, the Americans in control of that, and people cluelessly, keep bringing up Americans to play the part. It's supposed to be a Brit.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
we'll
I mean, I find this to be really fascinating for a couple of things. One, you've got, the three leads have now been announced, right?
And they're cute as buttons.
They are cute as buttons.
If you're looking you're watching on our GBH News YouTube channel, you'll see the young cast, the new young cast of Harry Potter. Or if you're here at the library, of course, it's on our monitor.
But they are those three kids. Their lives are about to change forever in a way that pretty much I would say that only a handful of people on this earth understand, including the three who played them in the film series, right? So I wonder, are they going to talk to those folks, not to necessarily prep for the role, but to prep for what is about to happen to their lives? So I find that to be really interesting.
Well, that's from our perspective. Do we know that the books are just as popular as they were when they first came out? See, I don't know that.
Well, it must be to invest this much money. I mean, there is very starry casting because it's John Lithgow, it's Janet McTeer, well, we don't know, but there's speculation that Cillian Murphy is going to actually play Lord Voldemort.
That would be excellent.
Maybe that's
Nick
wishful
Frost
thinking.
is Hagrid. Yeah, I mean, this is a big deal cast. I also, it's interesting to look at this. I find myself wondering 25 years hence, 50 years hence, and I guess maybe I'm making the assumption that I think Harry Potter has staying power. I think it probably does. But, what is going to be the definitive version of this? Or is this going to be the kind of thing where we keep spinning it out over and over again? I think about, Pride and Prejudice, right?
Yes.
There have been series and movies multiple times over a course of, the history of, as long as we've had television and movies, right?
And there can't be enough.
People argue about which is the best version.
Yep.
And so, is that going to happen with this? Is this a piece of literature that now is going to stand the test of time, and we're going to see this version, and then in 50 years they'll do another version?
Same thing with Scrooge. Same thing. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. It's like moving into this new status with this project.
And can reflect the times. But speaking of the times, so here comes the major ripple. A lot of people are wondering why this is happening when it's basically giving more money to J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
And we have this ongoing debate with when people consider someone to be problematic. In this case, she is considered problematic because she does not support trans rights, and recently was back in the news because the UK Supreme Court ruled that trans women should not be recognized as women and that sex should be biological. She posted an image saying, "I love it when a plan comes together," all as this casting is being announced. So again, we revisit this issue. Do you separate the art from the person? In this case, I do. I mean, if you're identifying a story that has been meaningful to you and your family, because so many parents shared this with their kids, it is easy to do that. The one case where I can't do it is Woody Allen, because his films are essentially about his life. So his look on relationships and marrying his daughter wife is kind of problematic.
Yeah. I don't know.
Did you say daughter wife?
Yes, he did.
Well, she was his stepdaughter.
I know. I mean,
essentially.
I know. Yes. Yeah.
All right, I just want to name the new cast members: Arabella Stanton, Dominic McLaughlin, and Alistair Stout. very British names for
Yes.
these young cast members.
Tens of thousands of kids auditioned.
30,000.
Tens
30,000.
of thousands. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I get that. I do get that. I'm very interested to see it, I guess.
Well,
see.
next, ahead of the Tonys, we have some marquee drama, a Broadway battle royale with Patti LuPone turning up the heat on her long-simmering feud with Audra McDonald. This was quite interesting. Put this back in the category of feuds we didn't know existed, and frankly,
didn't know we needed, but
Right.
kind of needed.
But kind of needed, and I wonder if Audra McDonald knew this existed.
No.
So basically, Patti LuPone gave an interview recently with The New Yorker, and first of all, she was asked about Audra McDonald's performance in Gypsy, which I think a lot of people, myself included, saw, thought this is incredible, deserves the Tony nomination. She got the Tony nomination. She is the most Tony awarded actor in theater history, Broadway history. And Patti LuPone, when asked about that performance, just said, "Well, it's a beautiful day out." And
After like a 10-second pause.
After a very long pause, and then indicated that there had been this ongoing feud with Audra McDonald. Callie, you can give the other leg of this.
Well, what was interesting is that Audra McDonald has just came out and said, I didn't know we had a feud. I haven't even seen her in 11 years, though we're not friends. So what happened was the actress who is in Hell's Kitchen was in a play, I guess, in a building close to where...
Right next door, yeah.
Right next door to where Patti LuPone was playing. And the music, if you've seen Hell's Kitchen, and I haven't, is fabulous, but it is loud. And so she said it was too loud. It was interfering with her thing, complained about it. But the way that she complained about it, let the young actress who's in the lead of the play said, I'm not appreciating your tone and the way that you've approached me about this. There's a way to handle this, and this didn't seem right. Okay, so that happened. And then later on, Audra McDonald then put a emoji supporting Keisha, I got to get her name.
Lewis, yeah.
Keisha Lewis. And so I think Patti LuPone interpreted that as that's a slam against her. And I don't think it was. I think it was, the way I'm looking at it, Audra McDonald supporting Keisha Lewis. And it didn't seem to be connected because it was months or weeks afterwards.
Yeah, well, I guess we're still not 100% sure that is what the feud is about. I mean, I think we kind of backfill this and say that's probably what the feud is about. But like Patti LuPone is out of her mind, which is sort of, I mean, that's a little bit her brand, right? Like
a lot of it her brand.
It's a lot of it her
I
brand,
didn't know
right?
that
So
until now.
Yeah, like this is not the first time she has an ongoing feud with Glenn Close, which goes way back to Sunset Boulevard, right? Which she was in Sunset Boulevard at the West End, and then when it came to Broadway, Glenn Close got the part, and Patti LuPone thought she was going to get it. I think there was even a court case around that one. I mean,
She yells at people from the stage.
Yeah.
If they have their
Now,
phones out.
I think she's my hero for that when they have those phones going and she yelled at people. I'm on her page.
Well,
on
you
that.
know what else? Sorry to interrupt your train of thought, Edgar, but I was reading the New Yorker piece. Do you know what else she did? This was not reported, but apparently on her way to the theater for when she was just starring with Mia Farrow on Broadway, she would take blow a bullhorn and scream out her car to everybody who was in the street in the way of her car trying to get to the theater.
Oh my God!
So
yeah, amazing.
Yeah,
Also,
it's the Patti show.
Yeah, 2002. There's a piece in the New York Post when she was in Noises Off, where apparently, like, first of all, she didn't get along with Peter Gallagher, who was her co-star in that, and they were like really frosty. And then there was this thing where they were raising money, and she was not for it, and neither was he, and then she felt like he turned on her. So she, at one point, curses out the stage manager, locks herself in the dressing room for like hours, and then doesn't show up for a couple of days. So she's got form, as they say, this kind of thing. But this article, I think, this reminds me a little bit, it's not quite as good, but do you remember, was it 2018, there was that GQ interview with Quincy Jones that was just so insane? And
where he was totally unfiltered.
Yeah, and like this has a little bit of that. It's like part of me is like, I'm here for unfiltered Patti LuPone just kind of losing her mind a little bit because it's kind of entertaining.
Yeah, well, but I think what's happening is that Audra McDonald is just not giving her much air and energy. And the folks on I don't know what it used to be called Black Twitter have just lost their minds.
Really?
Yeah, screaming, "Take a seat, Patty! Take a seat!" You're just mad because Audra McDonald has the most Tony nominations ever. Check your numbers.
Is there a case to be made that this is good for Broadway? I mean, I think about last week. I think we were talking about what's going on in the WNBA, and we talked about how like rivalries to a certain extent can fuel interest and stuff like that. Is this maybe a good thing? I don't know.
They're both so talented. I mean, I don't know if it fuels it. I mean, I think if people are already aware of their talent and appreciative of both of their talents, maybe that makes it more interesting. But I don't know if it draws
I have
new
to say,
people.
I think it's only better for Audra, who is still on stage in Gypsy. So it has people re-engaged and wondering, especially if you're supporting her, which I think she does have a lot of support. I think there's the Patty camp who they love the camp.
Yeah.
They love that she's this brassy figure who's completely unfiltered. I was going to go with another but
yes.
She's hinged, not not always hinged when you're taking a bullhorn to yell at the people in Times Square where you know where you're headed in Times Square. Maybe you just leave a little bit early to get to the theater so that you know you're going to get there on time. Then there are, of course, the people who love Audra McDonald, so this re-engages people to go to the theater and to see her in this really marvelous Tony-nominated performance in Gypsy.
Yes.
So I think, Edgar, I think this is good, and I think there are a lot of PR people who probably aren't upset that this is happening right now.
We'll see what it does for ticket sales, see what it does for Tonys are coming up, right? So
they're coming up in a week from Sunday.
Will they be in the same room together?
Wow. Well,
no, because Patty was not nominated this year.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
That's Callie dropping a little salt in that one.
Hope she's not listening.
Oh, well.
Oh, if she's listening, we'll feel the earth move.
Yes, it's true.
Well, next, Mike White, the creator of White Lotus, is trading in the tropics of Thailand for the islands of Fiji as a contestant on the 50th season of Survivor. So for people who don't know a lot about Mike White, this might be surprising because people would know him as the uber successful man behind the White Lotus franchise now. He is the one who created it. He is the one who directs a lot of the episodes, who has written, I think, almost all of the episodes, if not all of the episodes. But he also happens to be a huge fan of reality television, which is why he was so excited to be on Survivor previously, which is why he went on The Amazing Race with his father. And this actually has some DNA. We can trace the DNA to White Lotus, but here's what he had to say about his love for the Survivor franchise when he first appeared on the show in 2018.
For me, I'm a Survivor obsessive fanatic. Everybody in my business wants the Oscar. It's like, you're losers. Like, I want to win Survivor.
So, well, he rode that. He didn't win Survivor. He came very close, but of course he's winning HBO right now.
Yeah, I didn't know he was in all these other reality shows. He was on The Amazing Race. He just likes to compete. And he says he's drawn so much inspiration for the White Lotus from all these people competing with him. So apparently he was a very, very good, competitor on Survivor.
Yeah.
So this is interesting.
It's interesting. It also kind of makes sense. I mean, I remember, like one of the things, you just pointed it out, Jared. He does a lot of the White Lotus writing himself. And I remember when there was the writer's strike and there was a lot of conversation about like how can you have more equity in writers' rooms and stuff. And people were floating ideas like, well, maybe we ought to say there should be X number of this or that. And he really was standing his ground as I do this on my own. Like I lock myself in a room essentially and I write this stuff by myself. And that to me feels very in character with somebody who likes Survivor, right? Like the lone person out there in the wilderness on your own, like kind of having to fight and claw your way to survival, right? So this feels very in character to me.
And it's the 50th. Did we say that?
It's the 50th, and he's friends with Jeff Probst, who said, you'll never do this again now that he's got all of this fame and accomplishment and money that comes from White Lotus. But he's also, the DNA that we can trace is he's said that it was being on those shows, Amazing Race and Survivor, that allowed him to understand people and all their
weirdness,
guile, behavior, and creativity and narcissism and what they have done on these shows to succeed. And we see all of those characters in White Lotus. And by the way, if you're really paying attention, you're really a fan of Survivor, you'll also see cameos by some of the people he was on with for Survivor. So I'm sure anybody who's with him in this season is hoping that they're going to land a spot on White Lotus because that seems to be how he moves forward. So this should be pretty interesting and fun. When he writes a book, ultimately, we can't wait to read this too.
Also, 50 years of
Survivor.
it's not
50
years,
seasons,
50 seasons, but like still, like
Yeah.
it's probably 20. It's close to 25 years or something,
amazing.
isn't it? I mean, it is a long time. That speaking of surviving, that has really lasted the test of time. And there was, I remember when Survivor first hit, right? It was like, it was a new level for reality television, right? It was like, oh my gosh, they have like stepped into this craziness. And now it seems pretty tame compared to the stuff
Remember,
out
the
there.
New York Times put it on the front page when the season finale was happening, because that was one of those moments where the entire country was watching.
Deal, right?
It also gave us some, pop culture sayings like "the tribe has spoken."
Yeah.
So it's made an impact. We'll see.
Well, coming up, Popeye the Sailor wasn't just jacked up on spinach. He was really riding the high seas. That's next on The Culture Show. Stay with us.
The Trump administration has fired hundreds of people at the Voice of America. The global broadcaster has been a hallmark of American soft power for decades.
As VOA steps away, you're basically leaving Africa and parts of Asia, Middle East, Latin America to China and Russia, which are increasing their budgets.
That story next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And the Boston Speakers Series, announcing its upcoming season at Symphony Hall for 7 evenings, featuring Dr. Anthony Fauci, Ken Burns, Outliers author Malcolm Gladwell, and freed Russian political prisoner Vladimir Kara-Murza. BostonSpeakers.org. And Central Square Theater, presenting Mrs. Warren's Profession by George Bernard Shaw. The mysterious Mrs. Warren built a global empire. Her daughter is shocked to learn how. Now through June 22nd. CentralSquareTheater.org. And Porter Square Books, hosting Tim Weed with The Afterlife Project, a novel about scientists and their test subject working to save the human species. June 5th at 7 at PSB Boston Edition. Info at portersquarebooks.com.
GBH News is your home for trusted local news. Get it at 89.7 on the radio, gbhnews.org, and subscribe to the GBH News YouTube channel. GBH News, what matters to you.
I'm Jared Bowen. If you're just tuning in, it's our Arts and Culture Week in Review. I'm joined by co-hosts Callie Crossley and Edgar B. Horwick III. We're going over the latest headlines, which includes the land of live free or die, with an emphasis on die, because for many politicians, that's the hoped-for fate of the New Hampshire State Council on the Arts, which the state's legislature has axed. So this has been an ongoing story, and we have a sort of late-breaking development that Edgar will fill us up in on. But the House in New Hampshire decided that in this era of economic uncertainty, although that's in question, that they would zero out, basically, except for $1, all funding for the State Council for the Arts, which, as we've talked about, like all state organizations, and every state has one, this would be the only one to not have one if this were to go away. But they fund artists, they give grants to exhibitions, they help for theater and concert and education. The House decided not to include this anymore. The Senate had a chance to restore that. They didn't. And Edgar, I'll let you take it from here, because this moved a little bit this morning.
Yeah, it looks like there's a new proposal. So, yeah, to your point, Jared, the House wanted to eliminate it completely. I think one group inside of the Senate suggested this dollar thing so that they still existed, and basically were like, you can go raise your own money. Now it looks like the Senate is coming back with another proposal, and if I'm reading this right, essentially what they're saying is, I think there's going to be $150,000 for overhead costs, so that's more than the $1.
But certainly less than what they had before.
By far less than what they had before. And then what they're going to do is they're going to create something called the Granite Patron of the Arts program. And this is going to be a tax credit to folks who want to donate to this organization. So the idea is you would get a 50% state tax credit up to $700,000 a year for an individual. So basically they're now saying, okay, here's $150,000 for operating costs, and yeah, go ahead and raise your own money, but we're going to offer a 50% state tax credit up to $700,000 for those donations as you go and try to raise that money privately. It sounds like where things stand right now. That's the current proposal that's out there. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this, I've never heard of individuals being able to get tax credits. So, for example, here in Massachusetts, we have the film tax credit. That's from the state. So
Yeah,
normally
and that's how this would be.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it does not include. You couldn't give $50,000 and get half off of that as an individual.
No, it sounds a little bit more like like we see like energy type tax credits, right? Like if I get a new kind of heater, maybe there's like a tax credit if it's for me individually a state tax credit if I improve the efficiency of the heating unit in my house kind of thing. That's sort of what it feels a little bit more akin to. But I'm with you. I don't know anywhere else that does it this way.
And here's the other thing. If they had gone with the first plan, and we're assuming they've been saved, then they would be the only state in the nation without an arts council. And that just let that resonate for a moment. That's that's scary, and it speaks to these times because there were a lot of folks who were interested in zeroing them out who are like, what's the point of this anyway? I don't care, blah, blah, blah. There's 300 museums and other institutions that you named, Jarrett, that the Arts Council supports. Also, even if this new thing went through, there's an assumption that they'd be able to raise like $1 million from the federal government, which, as we've been talking about, that does not exist anymore.
It's evaporated.
So,
and this is not to say that everybody is against this. Certainly there are proponents of it, including the Republican Governor Kelly Ayotte, who has said that she is in favor of the arts. She sees it entwined with tourism, and we have talked many times on this show, and it's the same for New Hampshire, it's the same for Boston and Massachusetts, how the arts are an economic engine when you total up the number of jobs it creates and the total amount of revenue it brings into a community. And we know what the budgeting process is like. It has all of these different iterations, so this could change, but it does send a signal. I will say that I think it's worth watching if it does move the way that you just discussed, Edgar, and there are these tax credits. Is this a viable funding mechanism going forward? Because I keep wondering about this in this moment where all of these arts organizations are losing money because they're at the whim of a new administration in Washington who wants to be at this swinging pendulum every time there's a change at the White House, where you could also have something stable. So I'm not saying that the government shouldn't support the arts, but I am saying that there needs to be stability because instability is not good for any organization.
I 100% agree with that, Jared. And I think as long as this stuff is happening in good faith, and it seems like this is, to your point, right, the governor in New Hampshire has said, listen, we want to find a way to support the arts, and if it is true that I'm totally fine. You make a case that direct government funding is not the best way to do that, but this seems like a potential. This does have the potential if it works. I'm 100% with you, Jared. If this is a good way to fund the arts, let's double down on it. Let's have other states try this.
One point, Governor Ayotte is in favor of supporting the arts at half the level. There's a dollar figure, so there's half the level of which it's been supported in the past. So, folks need to understand that's going to mean some changes in how it would operate, assuming it still operates.
Well, as we're talking about the vein of solutions, in the face of budget cuts and other challenges to the arts in Western Mass, a group of organizations including Tanglewood, Mass MoCA, the Clark Art Institute, and Jacob's Pillow has formed the Berkshire Arts and Culture Alliance. Their mission is to promote the arts and draw attention to the region's robust arts and culture economy. I love seeing this story because this is what can happen when there's collaboration. Although it's early days, we'll see how it all bears out. But basically, you've had a group of arts organizations out in the Berkshires. There are a number of them, 10 organizations who've been meeting since Halloween, and so they already had this camaraderie, this collaboration in place when these unanticipated federal cuts came into the picture, and so they're looking at a whole host of issues that they can address and be basically better together.
So what I think is interesting is, again, picking up the thread that the arts are economic, it is an economic driver. 1.5 billion in economic impact in Berkshire County, and 3,100 people employed by the arts in some of these organizations. So that's what you're getting and what you're losing if they didn't figure out a way to sort of collaborate and come together. I have one question, and we won't know this until they start trying to work together, is how do you be a part of this huge umbrella organization and also maintain some of your own identity as, an institution?
But you know what? Here we are, and I don't want to sort of over-egg the pudding, as they say, but here we are, at the...
Do they say that?
I had not heard that, but okay.
I've been listening to this Irish podcast. I think I'm picking up all of these phrases. Okay. No. But so here we are kind of at the beginning of this big celebration. We're going to do the 250th of America, and something about this reminds me very much of that. At the time, you had 13 individual states or whatever, and, they were all under a certain amount of pressure, and they started to get together and say, hey, what are your issues? What are your issues? What are your issues? And they kind of realized some of those issues were the same, and they worked it out. They put a list together. They said, here's the stuff that we're going to complain about, and they complained, and the government in the UK said, well, we don't really care. So they went and did it their own way, and this at its core reminds me of that. These are organizations with their own identities who are saying, hey, we're all facing a similar thing. You can imagine them at the table saying, what are the things we share? What are the challenges we share? Let's put an organization together that is going to focus on these shared challenges and see if we can't solve this. It's very American.
And not to further scramble the pudding with the eggs or whatever you just said.
Over-egg the pudding.
Look at some of the issues they're addressing. Transportation from Boston to the Berkshires. They know that it's still... So many people in Boston look at the Berkshires and look at the map and think, there be dragons. They don't even know that the Berkshires exist. Let's get people to the Berkshires. They can collaborate for that. They can collaborate for affordable employee housing because they know, again, rising tides. If they can get employees to have the economic means to afford housing there, then they can, again, be well supported. They want to enhance climate resiliency and safety measures out there. So these are all things that I think they can do together that doesn't, Callie, to your point, cannibalize what their individual identities are, but hopefully emboldens the Berkshires even more. I think this is really exciting, and it would be nice to see this replicated, and maybe we will, because some of the participating players out in the Berkshires also have a presence like Tanglewood, BSO, here in Boston.
I think it's going to be very interesting to see. I would just like to note that in both of these stories, the one in New Hampshire where it was kind of brought back from the brink, and this one, a lot of folks credit that public interest and pressure to bringing these issues to the forefront. Because, people just kind of sometimes just take... They're always there. Aren't the museums always there? Well, now we're learning. No, they're not always there.
It turns out people generally like the arts.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? It's like people like it.
Mm-hmm. And they also like Labubus. All right, that means it's time for our lightning round. Callie, I think we know what story struck you this week. Love me some Shirley Bassey.
The man with the Midas touch.
Okay, you have to start talking now.
All right, okay, anyway. They're remastering the John Barry Goldfinger score. They reissued on CD. They're reissuing on vinyl. They have 2 sets of limited editions. One of them is, I imagine they're going to be pricey. One of them is a Knox Bullion limited edition. I guess you get 700 of those, and then far less than that for the gold edition of the Goldfinger vinyl track. But I think it's wonderful. So these are the colors. They'll reprint them on vinyl. Apparently in the past there had been some futzing around with how some pieces of the whole score have been laid out, but in this case they're getting it right. So it's the Fort Knox Bullion versus the Body Paint Gold limited edition. So there you go.
This sounds very fun. And Edgar, we're going to tee up
He was described in his New York Times obit as a Zelig-like figure, which is something I think that's something to achieve. But amazing musician. He was a guitar virtuoso as a child. He did the McCoys thing, and he's famous for Hang On Sloopy, but he also did Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, another 70s, kind of masterpiece, so to speak. And he worked with all kinds of people, including Barbra Streisand, Peter Frampton, and Weird Al Yankovic. He produced a bunch of Weird Al Yankovic stuff. But I will say the reason I bring this up is just that song, Hang On Sloopy, for me is it is the perfect kind of garage rock and roll song. I mean, people talk about that idea of like your first high and then you're chasing it the rest of your life. You know, for me, hearing that song, I every time I hear it, I'm just like, incredible. I don't know what it is about that tune, but I love it.
Well, here's my lightning round for the week. Let's take a moment to revisit the 1980 film starring Robin Williams as Popeye.
Oh, I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm not from good to take tonight. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man.
Okay, so that was a sped-up version of Popeye the Sailor Man, because we learned this week when Barry Diller was doing a conversation with Anderson Cooper at the 92nd Street Y. Barry Diller was talking about his book, and of course he's gotten a lot of press for coming out so late in life. But I thought the most interesting thing he talked about coming out of this, was when Anderson Cooper asked him what the most coked-up set was that he ever stepped upon, because remember, he was a CEO of Paramount for years, from 1974 to 1984. He said it was the set of Popeye, starring Robin Williams in his first feature film role after Mork and Mindy. He said, Barry Diller did, that they were sending cocaine to Malta in film canisters. And so he said if you actually go back and look at that film, you can see, those performances are enhanced by performance-enhancing cocaine.
Wow.
I think that actually, you've seen this movie, right? That explains a lot.
I know.
Because that film is a strange fever dream.
It is.
Yeah.
The only thing that's slow in that film is the octopus that comes up over the edge. You can't even you can't get a cooked up octopus.
Yeah, maybe olive oil is a little bit slow.
I think the cooking was involved
everybody.
from start to finish. Like, even in the conception of that. Like, should we do this film? I've got an idea. Yes.
I once interviewed Robert Altman, the director. I wish I had asked him this question. Who thought to ask what was the most coked up film you ever made?
I mean, that wouldn't come up necessarily.
No.
But, you know.
Well, that is all that is all for this edition of The Culture Show. Tune in Monday when we're burger bound with Chef Andy Husbands joining us about his new cookbook, plus the artist behind a massive mural at TD Garden. All that plus gardening tips on Monday. Callie, what's coming up on Under the Radar?
We're doing a full hour on summer reading with our 3 librarians, including Veronica, who is from the BPL. And it's fabulous, fabulous ideas and suggestions. You'll love it.
And Edgar, what's coming up on the Curiosity Desk?
Do you know the difference between a speed bump, a speed hump, and a speed table?
Nope.
Keep your eyes open. We got an episode that's going to give you that and more.
Sounds very exciting. Thanks today to the BPL technical and logistics crew, Maddie Geyer, Bill Francis, Sandra Lopez-Burke, and Juan Jose Cadena, Chris Hanks, Pat Lally, and Olivia Corshio. Also thanks to the Lennox Hotel and the Newsfeed Cafe. Thank you to everybody who came down to visit us here today. We so appreciate having you here, including Grey Wolf Press. I'm Jared Bowen. Don't forget to pet your Labubu and have an art-filled weekend.
Where's Mary? Where is she? Where is she? She's just about to close up the library.
The Culture Show is made possible in part by a generous contribution from the Fiducia Fund, proud to support this station's art and culture programming.
GBH's
Nicholas Harnoncourt and the Concertgebouw Orchestra. That's Haydn's The Clock Symphony. Alessia Bax with Rachmaninoff. Next.
Classical Radio Boston is WCRB-FM 99.5 HD1 Lowell, Boston, WGBH-FM HD2 Boston, WCAI-FM HD2 Woods Hole, WJMF-FM HD1 Smithfield, Providence, and at classical.org.
Just about 3 o'clock here in Boston, and here's pianist Alessio Bax with Rachmaninoff's Vocalise.